All right, Panther Lair, let's talk about why the Missouri Tigers were so successful taking away the Pittsburgh Panthers zoom action and their victory over Pitt this past Tuesday. Now, one of the things that Missouri does in general is switch everything. So I think that was already going to be a part of their defensive blueprint, but it's something that Pitt wasn't prepared for in regards to this action, and I think they just weren't able to get anything from it, and it's a big part of what the Panthers try to do, and this was a big struggle for them. So let's talk about it. We're going to go into this first clip here, and you're going to see Leggett is going to throw this pass into Federico. This pretty much initiates their zoom action. You'll see this 5 out. They're pretty much going to run it out of there. This could be delay, that type of stuff. But it's basically going to be Federico or Guillermo Diaz-Graham kind of initiating in this look. And you're going to see Noah Carter here is going to jump out on the switch and try to deny the very clear path that Carrington is going to try to take to receive this dribble handoff. Now, this happened a little bit against Oregon State as well, where Carrington just kind of stopped here in the middle, but he's kind of forced to this time. The key to zoom is it should be knocking out a help defender in which this player gets the DHO and should be able to attack this double gap. That's one of the things that makes zoom, especially in a 5-out kind of set, so valuable. Pitt doesn't really take advantage of that. So you see, even when Carrington does eventually get this handoff, I mean, you have Carter in a trailing position. Now you have Federico's defender having to kind of sink to stay with Federico while also trying to contain dribble penetration. This should be a win for Pitt. Now you could do an exchange here, right? It's a very popular thing on the weak side. It could potentially occupy help in regards to the pick and roll so that there's kind of a confusion on the low man for who is going to tag here. But that doesn't end up happening. So even though Carrington gets, a couple feet into inside the circle here, I think there's an opportunity to throw this pass. I mean, he can see that Leggett's defender is helping out of the strong side corner, which you don't normally do, although this is kind of becoming the weak side as he's on this side. But this isn't really a normal tag per se. So it's likely that he should probably just throw this into Federico. But Bob generally defaults to throwing these back to the perimeter. And I don't say that's like a wrong play. Leggett was cold all night, but it's kind of the point with Pitt where that's like the only play that he'll make, or he'll try to make more often than not. And I think this makes him a little bit easier to defend in this action, easier to defend if it's always going to default to that. If you don't test to throw in on the mismatch, because remember, this was switched. So the guy that ended up tagging here, right or wrong, this was Bub Carrington's man. You'd like to think that Federico has a pretty good chance to finish over top if he does that. The other thing with the weak side exchange is this would have put Hinson in the corner and had Bub chose to drive a little bit harder. The one pass away in the corner, if this guy stepped over to help, would have been Hinson, much better of a shooter than Austin. So just not exactly the best execution. The pass to Leggett, not horrible, who ended up just being cold all night. We didn't know that here at the 17:03 mark, but he doesn't really ever look inside. Now you're going to see here, one of the things that made this one difficult is that Pitt never was decisive enough to just attack a switch or to shoot wide open shots. I think that's what happens here. So Austin dribbles in, gets 2 guys on him, which is nice. Kind of that in and out really just kept that there. But like Lowe can catch this and immediately swing it to Guillermo if he wants here. Like that's available. He dribbles a little bit more, kind of sucks in the defense. They end up resetting. And then Leggett goes, Leggett, who at this point is very cold. I mean, that's just a really, really tough shot. This just is not a great possession. So I think the point here is that Pitt just really didn't do a great job when Missouri shut down their zoom action via switches and knowing how to take advantage of that. Sometimes it was a little bit over dribbling, sometimes a little bit over sharing. The whole team wasn't really shooting that well except for Hinson, so it was kind of hard to think, hey, they're going to force a shot. But this was kind of in a juncture in the game where I think that if they would have just stuck to what they've been doing, they may have been better off and been confident in attacking some of those switches. And here we see in the last sequence, so this is actually one where it's successful. So a couple switches occur here right away. So you're going to see Nick Honor, who's 5'10". He's going to switch on to Hinson here. And that's going to put Bub in a matchup who's, a similar sized player here. But what happens also, again, is when they switch this action, so this would have been kind of that like zoom action, but they instead of, okay, we're not going to line up that way. Then Honor now switches on to Guillermo, which is definitely a mismatch. And then when he cuts through, they try to switch back, and Hinson ends up making a 3. I think this is one of the ways that they could have maybe exploited it. So instead of having a big be the one who dictates the dribble handoff coming out of zoom action, that maybe you allow that to be a guard, because you could have exploited the fact that switching the smaller guard into a big, such as Federico or Guillermo, I mean, they would have had to go into him. Obviously, Guillermo a little bit more polished offensively, but the patience shown here, the willingness to kind of try something else to kind of invert how this looked, I think did allow them to exploit mismatches. They just didn't do that enough, because obviously I think this is like the lone example that may have worked out and just happened to look like a zoom alignment with Carrington with the ball in his hands. But Pitt has to do a better job of trying to make adjustments to this in the moment in order, if they, to be successful against something like this, because teams are going to continue to do this. If Carrington and Hinson settle mostly for jump shots and they don't attack switches by going downhill, which they pretty much don't. Like, I think any actual stat out there for how many times they're attempting shots at the rim puts them both like in the bottom of the team, then they're going to have a hard time with this. So they have to find ways to exploit this. I think this is one of those ways. They'll both get better. They'll both learn more, but this is something that I would jump out on tape to me, obviously. So I think it's going to jump out on tape to opposing teams.